I'm very delighted to be back. I was invited when I started in my current position 9 years ago, and that was an impressive exercise. I was with your current Prime Minister, and I was impressed by the quality and the number of people attending this ICT event. I realized 9 years after that the more I work, the more the situation gets worse, which is quite worrying. I just want to associate myself to what Pedro said on President Perez for his statesmanship, for his endless contribution for the search of peace, and I send my best wish to his family in this difficult moment. I have a bit more than 10 minutes, between 10 and 15, which is not much to share my views on the threats, then give you a hint, no more than that, of what the EU is doing, and finally mention some of the challenges we are faced with. We are wrestling on a day-to-day basis. On the threat, as I suggested, it's pretty high. Using the way the French Minister of Interior and the Prime Minister of France put it yesterday or some days ago, it has never been that high in recent years, since 20 years, I think they said. And it's much more complex than before, than on the day after 9/11. Why? Because we have so many sources of threat, homegrown, we know, people who have no contact with Daesh or with Al-Qaeda, who just get radicalized on the internet in prison. Prison plays a major role, and radicalized sometimes by Salafi organization. In our own country, Sharia for Belgium played a major role in the first recruitment of foreign terrorist fighters. The second one is indeed this high number of foreign terrorist fighters. Pedro said more than 5,000, which is huge. When we see the recent attack in Europe, we've seen that they were operating in very well-structured network. You had people in charge of logistics, some people in charge of mounting the attack itself. They were operating in Europe across borders. The growing link between terrorism and organized crime, or petty crime, they were using the migration flow in order to sneak into Europe. The direction was coming from Raqqa. And finally, they were using a sophisticated encryption device, Telegram, and other way. And thirdly, the third source is, of course, still Daesh, and we should not forget Al-Qaeda. Daesh in big trouble in the Caliphate. But we all know that the ideology will remain and that the virtual caliphate will not disappear overnight. So if you look at the challenge for the security service, they have to find and interrupt plots from people sent from Raqqa. Al-Adnani was heading a planning cell, and yesterday, I think in Germany, they arrested 3 guys who were sent, same forged document than those who were involved in Paris. So we believe there are several sleeping cells just waiting for the right signal to target. So people sent from Raqqa, people directed from Raqqa, and the French are very nervous about a certain Rashid Kassim, who through Telegram is really trying to motivate people and offer them some ideas on who to target. And this guy has been involved in several of the recent plots in France. The murder of the priest, the 2 police officers killed, and the 2 women who were arrested last week in Paris. So people sent, people directed, people inspired, of course, by the very effective ideology and, I would say, a last category of probably mentally ill people who are just copycat phenomenon and they want to do the same. So it's pretty more complex than before. And I would just mention 5 amplification factors. The first one is the growing number of failed state or failing state and of state violence. A recent poll showed how much state violence plays a role in the process of radicalization. Yemen, Libya, Syria, and we know how much terrorist organizations are found to find wide place where they can regroup, retrain, and build their capability. The second one is probably, for me, I'm not very sophisticated in my geopolitical analysis, but at the core of the problem is the growing tension between the Sunni and the Shia. Is it a tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Is it geopolitics? Is it a sectarian war? But I still believe that the Sunni world is feeling more and more, has the feeling more and more that we may have a long-term bet on Iran. And they are not part of the winning team. And that may explain a lot this war by proxy, a lot of support of extremist groups. So unless we find solution to reassure the Sunni world that we are not favoring one camp, I think will not come to an end to this problem. The third one, sometimes we don't like to mention that, and there are, of course, huge debates among scholars as to the role of the ideology, radical Islam, in the process of radicalization. If you just take France, we have on one hand someone like Gilles de Kerchove who believes that it plays a role in the process of radicalization, and other people like Olivier Roy who believe, he used a quite good word to capture his idea, sort of Islamization of radicalization. It happens at the end of the process of radicalization. It provides a cut in a very black and white explanation why you can use violence to push your ideas. I think it plays a role. It depends on the country, it depends on the person. But it plays a role. And unless we address this problem, I think, again, we'll not come to an end. The fourth aspect which may amplify is indeed Arab Spring. Some of the countries which went through this process had to reorganize, restructure their security apparatus. And if you take a country like Tunisia, they started reorganizing themselves, but they have not completed the process, and therefore they are probably less equipped than they were under Ben Ali to absorb the huge number of terrorist fighters who will come back from Libya and Syria. And finally, you know that more than anyone, high-tech development enable a lone wolf, in a way, to commit an attack with catastrophic consequences. Drones, you know too well that terrorist organizations can operate drones, miniaturization, concealment of a very small quantity of explosives, 25 grams can blow up a plane. Synthetic bio, although in our contact with the Israeli opposite number, chemical threat is seen as more worrying for the time being. But one day we may read in Spy magazine an article on how to process a virus in your mom's kitchen, if you remember the article for Bob. And cyber, I don't believe there is today something like cyber terrorism, but I would not be surprised if before 5 years we might have something of that sort. So that's a bit how we see the threat. How do we respond? The EU is not the prime responsible for security. Even after the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, we still act in support of our member states. But the paradox is that when you see the polls in Europe, especially today, 82% of the EU citizens would like to see more Europe in security. So my message to the leaders in Europe is, despite the fact that we are not the prime responsible, there is a huge expectation. And this message has been very well understood by heads of state and government and by Brussels. If you look at just this week, on Monday, there is a new British commissioner, despite Brexit, who has been appointed by President Juncker to be in charge 24/7 of security. And he was in the European Parliament for his hearing, and he has been confirmed on Monday. Today, when I speak, President Juncker delivered his State of the Union, which is the yearly important speech, and will announce a lot of, I think, ambitious proposals on security. And on Friday, heads of state and government, in a meeting chaired by President Tusk, will discuss ways to re-energize the EU process. And Mr. Tusk put on top of the subject in his letter, which is accessible on internet, counter-terrorism and border control, because he believes that it is critical if we want to regain the trust of the citizens. So I expect that we will have to work a hell of a lot more in the coming months. Since the last 2 years, I'm very impressed. I would not have bet €1 when I was appointed 9 years ago that we would be in where we are today. But I think it's just the beginning. So Europe will be more and more engaged. We've been asked to work in three main basket of policies, the repressive response, prevent, and engagement with our direct neighbors, because it's around the Mediterranean that we have a direct problem, and it's our first line of defense. I don't have time to go into the many measures that were adopted these last 2 years in terms of police cooperation, criminal justice, the fight against financing of terrorism, border control. Amazing what we have done, pushed by, of course, this huge migration flow. But there is more biometrics, more systematic security check on EU citizens and country nationals. Of course, when they cross the external border of the European Union, and a collective work by all the agencies, Frontex, which is in charge of border management, Europol, which is our mini FBI, and Eurojust, and the police and the border guard of the Member States. So I don't go through all this, but I would like now to address these 4 or 5 challenges that I see where we need to do more. The first one, and in fact it's based on the 2 main recommendations of the 9/11 report, which were the need to connect the dots and the need to think out of the box, because there was a failure of imagination. We, that's Canadian speaking, had not imagined that a plane could be a weapon, like in this, a truck could be a weapon. So we need to connect the dots. What does it mean? It means you need to ensure that we populate the different databases which exist, and that we use them more. And part of my job is to put the pressure on the member states so that they do feed more and do use more these different databases. Also that we cross these databases, that there is a sort of interoperability between the different databases. This is a huge challenge. But the biggest challenge, in Europe at least, at the level of the European Union, is to make sure that the 2 main communities, the law enforcement community on one hand, and the intel community on the other hand, do work more together. And this is a challenge. They have improved significantly the way they work. In recent months, Europol has developed inside the organization a Europol Counter-Terrorism Center, which is full of potential, where they try to put together information on different forms of crime, trafficking in human beings, trafficking in drugs, forged documents, and so forth, and information on terrorism. That is for the law enforcement community, and for the first time, the intel community has structured its own cooperation by setting up at the Dutch Security Service in Zoetermeer, in the Netherlands, a human and IT platform. Huge development. But now what we need to do is to build a bridge between the 2, or create some sort of fusion center at the level of the European Union, but that's not that easy to achieve. There are many other issues like digital evidence. We will need more and swifter access to digital evidence if we want to secure more convictions of returnees. Encryption, which we have just started discussing, very sensitive and very tricky issue. So that's one set of problems. The second one is to invest massively in prevent. And of course it's a subject in itself, no time to develop it, but I would say more in 2 directions. More in the obvious policy to prevent. Internet. We have started discussing with the major players, and I saw Facebook was in Tel Aviv yesterday, on how to remove more quickly and more illegal content from the platform. We've built some mechanism at Europol, referral units. We are discussing with the companies how they could move to an automated way. There is so far some reluctance, but I think they should move to that, like they do for pedopornography. How do we develop, as Pedro said, counter-narrative, and I think we've made interesting progress on that front. So that there is some progress, we need to do much more. So that's one. The second one is how can we train better the frontliners to detect les signaux faibles, the weak signal of radicalization. This is another one. The third one is rehabilitation. We're not advanced enough in Europe to handle the returnees. We'll not send them all in jail for lack of evidence in some time, or just because it's not desirable to send them in jail. Jail is, we know, a major incubator of radicalization. So we need to have effective rehabilitation program. Not all the member states have that. So we need to invest a lot more in it. But on the other side, you have all the, what I call CVE relevant policies, all these policies which have to be developed, but not seen as mainly driven by prevention objective. Education, massive mainstreaming on CVE on education. Culture, youth policy, access to jobs, both in Europe and or in a direct neighborhood. That's the first set of them. The second one, and it's interesting to see the debate in France, that was impossible to raise some months ago, and now it starts being raised more and more, is the need to develop a European Islam. How can we create the condition for the development of former President Sarkozy captured the idea by saying a European Islam and not Islam in Europe. That is, how can the Muslims practice their religion in a transparent, peaceful, relaxed way like all the other religions? It is critical. Third, integration. We've seen already Salafi organization trying to recruit among the refugees in Germany. It takes time to integrate. You don't integrate in Germany in overnight. And so we have to invest much more on that. So that's the second set. The third one was mentioned by Pedro, and it's on top of my work, is how do we handle the massive number of returnees from Syria and Iraq. We should not repeat the big mistake we made when the Russians withdrew from Afghanistan, and we left the Mujahideen, who were supported by some friendly service, into the wild, and who started destabilizing many countries in the world, starting with Algeria. We know that the Algerians refer to them by calling them the Afghans, and the Black Decade in Germany started with the return of the Afghans. 200,000 people were killed. So if we don't want them to destabilize Tunisia, possibly Morocco and others, and coming back in Europe in the hundreds, we need at least to discuss, to compare notes, if not to define a common policy. This is, I believe, urgent, as well as improving the way we share information all around the Mediterranean. Turkey is critical, of course, but not only Turkey. And we're not there yet. We don't use Interpol enough. So that's the third. The fourth one is, and that was referred to by Pedro as well, for Europe, more engaged with the countries around the Mediterranean. As I said, the MENA countries, the Western Balkans, and Turkey. Many of the MENA countries need a lot of support, technical assistance. First, conceptual. Counter-terrorism, you know more than anyone else, is not just an intel or a police response. So a more balanced, rule of law compliant, subtle approach, but it's also on border, on information sharing, on a judicial approach, which is very often lacking, and on a massive prevent policy. So there we have started. Pedro mentioned, we visit all of them. We try to mobilize EU money, EU expertise. There is a lot more that we need to do, but we're, I think, on the right track. And finally, a special partnership. And we start by mentioning the one we tried to develop with Israel. The meeting we had yesterday, I think, was very fruitful. We're like-minded, the US, Israel, and others. We need to work much more closely together, but we need to engage with other countries as well, where sometimes it's not so easy, and we start doing that. We want to reinforce our partnership with Egypt, Turkey. Turkey is critical in this respect, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. So these are some of the challenges. They're not easy ones. But you will see a much more determined Europe in this field. We're not the prime responsible, but I think more and more will be in this business, and I hope for the better. Thank you very much for your attention.